By the late 1930s, the U.S. Army's mechanized doctrine was still in its early stages. Most of its vehicles were outdated, and mobility in reconnaissance and infantry support remained heavily dependent on motorcycles, horses, and light trucks. European developments, especially Germany's rapid mechanization under Adolf Hitler, were being closely watched by American military planners. German blitzkrieg tactics demonstrated the power of fast, coordinated, motorized warfare. The U.S. Army understood that it needed a small, durable, all-terrain vehicle capable of keeping pace with tanks and mechanized infantry units, and performing the vital roles of scouting, communication, and light transport. In 1938, the Army Quartermaster Corps initiated early discussions on replacing the motorcycle and sidecar combinations used by cavalry and infantry units. The primary need was for a lightweight, four-wheel drive reconnaissance vehicle that could move over rough terrain, transport soldiers or equipment, and perform as a multi-role tool in field conditions. The War Department's focus intensified after the outbreak of war in Europe in 1939. German panzer divisions overran Poland in weeks, using superior mobility to overwhelm defenses. American observers realized that the U.S. Army, still relying on horses and slow trucks for much of its mobility, was ill-prepared for such modern warfare. By mid-1940, the Army's requirements became formalized. The Quartermaster Corps issued a call to 135 American automobile manufacturers for a prototype of a general-purpose reconnaissance car. The specifications were demanding. The vehicle had to weigh no more than 1,300 pounds, have four-wheel drive, a payload of 600 pounds, a wheelbase of around 75 inches, and be strong enough to carry a mounted .30 caliber machine gun. It had to start in all weather conditions, handle steep grades, and operate across mud, sand, and snow. The Army needed it urgently, giving companies only 49 days to produce a working prototype. Only two small firms responded initially: the American Bantam Car Company of Butler, Pennsylvania, and Willys Overland Motors of Toledo, Ohio. The larger automakers were reluctant, seeing the timeline and weight restrictions as unrealistic. Bantam, though financially weak, decided to take the risk. Its lead engineer, Karl Probst, accepted the challenge. Working under severe time pressure, he designed a prototype in just a few days. The Bantam reconnaissance car was delivered to Camp Holabird, Maryland, on September 23, 1940, meeting almost all of the Army's specifications. Army tests quickly proved the Bantam's potential. It was light, fast, and maneuverable. The military immediately recognized its value, but there were concerns about Bantam's ability to mass-produce vehicles in large numbers. To ensure supply security, the Army invited Willys Overland and Ford Motor Company to build improved versions based on the Bantam design. Engineers from all three companies collaborated with the Army to refine the concept. Each company submitted its own prototype for testing: the Willys Quad, Ford Pygmy, and Bantam BRC-40. The evaluation period during late 1940 and early 1941 revealed that while Bantam's design was the original, Willys offered the most powerful engine with its Go Devil 60-horsepower motor. Ford's entry had superior production potential and some practical refinements. The Army decided to standardize the Willys model, incorporating Ford's best design features. By July 1941, Willys was awarded the main production contract for what would soon become known as the Jeep, while Ford was licensed to build the same vehicle under the model name GPW. Government, 80-inch wheelbase, Willys design. The term Jeep has several possible origins. Some attributed it to the phonetic pronunciation of GP, the Army designation for General Purpose Vehicle. Others claimed it was borrowed from Eugene the Jeep, a small, capable cartoon character from Popeye comics. Regardless of its origin, by early 1941, soldiers had adopted the nickname Jeep, and it quickly became the vehicle's universal identity. When the U.S. entered World War II after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the Jeep was already in limited production. As American industry shifted into full wartime mobilization, the vehicle became a symbol of standardized, mass-produced efficiency. Willys and Ford together produced hundreds of thousands of Jeeps between 1941 and 1945. In total, over 640,000 units were built, approximately 370,000 by Willys and 270,000 by Ford. The Jeep was intentionally designed for versatility and simplicity. It could be produced quickly, repaired easily, and operated in any environment. The vehicle's four-wheel drive allowed it to climb steep inclines, cross streams, and traverse mud, sand, and snow where heavier vehicles would fail. It could carry stretchers, tow artillery, deliver ammunition, and transport commanders directly to frontline positions. The Jeep's flat hood and open design even allowed soldiers to mount radios or machine guns when necessary. As American forces deployed across multiple theaters, the Jeep rapidly proved indispensable. Its light weight allowed it to be shipped easily overseas, disassembled for transport, and reassembled in the field. In North Africa, where General Erwin Rommel's Africa Corps challenged the Allies across vast deserts, the Jeep became a crucial tool for mobility. British and American units used it for reconnaissance, supply runs, and quick raids, replacing the unreliable motorcycles and bulky trucks of earlier campaigns. Adolf Hitler reportedly dismissed the Jeep early in the war as a toy when briefed on American light vehicle designs. German planners, accustomed to heavier vehicles like the Kubelwagen, a Volkswagen-based utility car used by the Wehrmacht, underestimated the American vehicle's adaptability. The Kubelwagen performed well on European roads, but struggled in rough terrain and mud. The Jeep, by contrast, was engineered to handle almost any surface, giving Allied forces a tactical advantage in mobility. The Jeep's influence extended beyond combat operations. It transformed how the U.S. military organized its logistics. Traditional supply convoys depended on predictable routes and clear weather, but the Jeep enabled rapid point-to-point transport of men and materials through rough country. In areas where roads had been destroyed or never existed, it kept units connected. This flexibility was crucial in campaigns that spanned deserts, jungles, and mountains. As the war expanded into multiple fronts, North Africa, Italy, the Pacific, and eventually Western Europe, the Jeep became the most recognizable symbol of Allied mechanization. It linked infantry to armor, supported artillery units, and allowed officers to survey battlefields quickly. It also served non-combat roles, from ambulance service to communication vehicle. Because of its simplicity, soldiers could maintain and repair it with minimal tools, using parts that were standardized across production lines. Wartime reports show that soldiers often adapted Jeeps for specific missions. In North Africa, they were equipped with extra fuel cans and water containers for long desert patrols. In Italy, they were fitted with snow chains and modified suspensions for mountainous terrain. In the Pacific, where tropical mud and humidity caused constant mechanical issues, the Jeep proved resilient compared to other vehicles. By 1943, the Jeep had become a logistical cornerstone of Allied strategy. General Dwight D. Eisenhower described it as one of the most vital tools in achieving victory, placing it alongside the C-47 transport aircraft and the landing craft in importance. American production lines continued to refine the design, simplifying parts to speed manufacturing. Ford and Willys maintained complete interchangeability between components, ensuring that parts from one factory fit perfectly with vehicles from another. The vehicle's presence also supported the U.S. strategy of supplying allies under the Lend-Lease program. Thousands of Jeeps were shipped to Britain, the Soviet Union, Free French forces, and China. Soviet troops, accustomed to poor roads and extreme winter conditions, valued the Jeep for its reliability and ease of maintenance. It became a common sight across Eastern Front supply routes and in Soviet reconnaissance units. By the time Allied forces began planning for the invasion of Europe, the Jeep was fully integrated into every aspect of their operations. It was used for mapping terrain, laying communication lines, and moving officers through staging areas. Its compact size allowed it to fit aboard landing craft and gliders, ready to roll into combat zones immediately upon arrival. In the months leading up to D-Day, the Jeep was present in every theater where American or Allied troops operated. The Jeep's creation marked a turning point in the mechanization of modern warfare. It bridged the gap between the horse and the tank, a small, reliable, universal machine that enabled armies to move faster and farther than ever before. Its introduction reflected the broader transformation of the U.S. military during World War II. Rapid innovation, mass production, and adaptability under pressure. What began as a desperate request for a lightweight reconnaissance car in 1940 became, within a few short years, one of the most important machines of the war. The Jeep's development showed how industrial coordination and engineering efficiency could be converted directly into battlefield success. As it spread across continents and campaigns, it reshaped how the Allies fought, giving them the mobility advantage that would eventually carry them from the deserts of Africa to the streets of Berlin. When American production of the Jeep reached steady output in late 1941, the first major testing ground for the vehicle in active combat came in the deserts of North Africa. The North African campaign had begun the year before, when Italian forces based in Libya launched an offensive against British-controlled Egypt. The rapid British counteroffensive under General Richard O'Connor had already shown that mobility was decisive in desert warfare. When Germany intervened to rescue its Italian ally in early 1941, the arrival of General Erwin Rommel and his Africa Corps transformed the region into one of the most strategically important battlegrounds of World War II. By the time U.S. forces entered the war, the Desert War had become a contest of endurance and logistics. The vast open terrain, extreme temperatures, and lack of infrastructure made traditional supply lines and troop movements difficult. Vehicles that could handle sand, rock, and heat were essential. Early in the campaign, both the British and German armies relied heavily on light utility vehicles. The Germans used the Volkswagen Kubelwagen, which performed adequately on firm ground but struggled in deep sand. The British used a range of trucks and adapted civilian cars, but these often broke down under desert conditions. The introduction of the Jeep to Allied forces in North Africa in 1942 provided a reliable, fast, and versatile solution that fundamentally improved Allied mobility. The first large-scale deployment of Jeeps occurred during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa in November 1942. The operation was designed to open a new front, relieve pressure on the Soviet Union, and secure the Mediterranean for Allied shipping. American and British forces landed at multiple points, including Algiers, Oran, and Casablanca, and quickly faced a combination of Vichy French resistance and German counteraction. Jeeps arrived with the initial invasion forces, carried aboard landing ships, and assembled on the beaches soon after unloading. Their performance immediately proved their value. Jeeps could move across the uneven desert terrain that slowed heavier vehicles. They transported officers, reconnaissance teams, and small infantry units across large distances. They carried ammunition, fuel, and rations from beachheads to forward positions. Because the desert offered no cover, reconnaissance was critical, and the Jeep's speed allowed scouts to map routes and locate enemy positions before the main columns advanced. The harsh desert climate posed constant mechanical challenges. Fine sand infiltrated engines and clogged filters, while high daytime heat caused rapid wear on tires and fuel systems. Maintenance units quickly developed modifications to improve reliability under these conditions. Air filters were strengthened, radiators were adjusted for better cooling, and drivers were trained to perform regular inspections during long marches. These adjustments made the Jeep one of the few vehicles that could sustain continuous operations in the desert. As the campaign progressed, the Jeep became integral to the operations of the British 8th Army, which had been fighting Rommel's Afrika Korps since 1941. The British had already formed specialized long-range reconnaissance and raiding units, most famously the Long-Range Desert Group, LRDG, and the newly created Special Air Service, SAS. These units required vehicles capable of traveling hundreds of miles behind enemy lines, carrying supplies and weapons, and enduring extreme desert conditions without resupply. The Jeep met those requirements and quickly replaced many of the earlier British trucks used for long-range patrols. The SAS, under the command of David Stirling, began equipping Jeeps with additional fuel drums, spare tires, and twin-mounted Vickers K machine guns. These modified Jeeps became the standard vehicle for deep penetration raids against Axis airfields and supply convoys. Moving by night and hiding by day, small groups of men in Jeeps covered vast distances, destroying aircraft, fuel depots, and communication lines. The speed and mobility of these vehicles allowed Allied raiders to strike targets far beyond what the Germans considered reachable by ground forces. For regular combat formations, the Jeep's value lay in logistics and command mobility. It allowed field commanders to move rapidly between units dispersed across wide desert fronts. Supply convoys used Jeeps to scout ahead and find routes through soft sand or rocky terrain. Medical units used them to reach wounded soldiers quickly and evacuate them to field hospitals. In areas where heavy trucks bogged down, Jeeps kept the supply chain intact. In contrast, Axis forces suffered from chronic vehicle shortages and poor logistics. The Afrika Korps relied heavily on supply lines stretching from Europe across the Mediterranean, constantly harassed by Allied air and naval forces. Their heavier vehicles consumed large quantities of fuel, which was already scarce. The light and fuel-efficient Jeep gave the Allies a logistical advantage, allowing them to extend their operational range deeper into enemy territory. During the Tunisian campaign in early 1943, the Jeep's role expanded even further. As American forces fought their first major battles against German troops, including the engagement at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, the Jeep served as a critical link between front-line units and rear-area command posts. It was used to carry communications equipment, allowing field units to maintain contact across difficult terrain where telephone lines could not be laid. Forward observers used Jeeps to direct artillery fire, and engineers used them to lay mines or repair damaged roads under fire. Reports from the North African Front emphasized that the Jeep's maneuverability often made the difference in battle. When armored columns advanced, Jeeps scouted for minefields and ambushes. When infantry moved forward, Jeeps brought up ammunition and carried back casualties. In mobile warfare, where positions shifted rapidly and communication lines had to be constantly re-established, the Jeep became an indispensable part of the tactical system. As Allied forces gained ground, the Jeep also became a key symbol of cooperation between different national armies. American production supplied not only U.S. units, but also British, Free French, and other Allied contingents. French forces under General Henri Giraud received Jeeps through American supply lines, using them in operations around Tunisia. The British 8th Army, advancing from the east after its victory at El Alamein, used large numbers of Jeeps in coordination with the U.S. Second Corps moving from the west. When the Axis defense in Tunisia collapsed in May 1943, nearly 250,000 German and Italian soldiers were captured. The success of Allied logistics and mobility, in which the Jeep had played a central part, allowed the Allies to outmaneuver Rommel's forces and cut off their retreat. American military reports credited the Jeep with enabling reconnaissance units to maintain the pace of pursuit through rough terrain where other vehicles failed. The lessons of the North African campaign had a lasting impact on Allied military planning. The experience demonstrated that mobility and flexibility were as decisive as firepower. The Jeep's reliability under extreme conditions confirmed its place as the standard light vehicle for all subsequent campaigns. After North Africa, Allied planners made the Jeep a central component of every expeditionary force, ensuring that production remained at full capacity. Captured German documents from 1943 show that Axis commanders were aware of the Jeep's effectiveness. Reports from the Africa Corps noted the Allies' superior tactical mobility and the difficulty of predicting their movements. German officers described the Jeep as small but dangerous, capable of moving across ground that tanks could not traverse. They observed that Allied reconnaissance was faster and more efficient, allowing them to anticipate Axis positions and avoid surprise attacks. In the aftermath of the North African victory, many Jeeps were modified for upcoming amphibious and mountain operations. Crews equipped them with waterproofing for shallow landings and added mounts for communication antennas. Mechanics developed new desert maintenance manuals, incorporating lessons learned during the campaign. These refinements prepared the vehicle for the next major Allied operation, the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. The North African campaign had proven not only the Jeep's endurance, but also its strategic impact. It allowed Allied armies to project power across a theater that had previously favored defensive warfare. In an environment where distances were vast and resources scarce, the Jeep ensured that Allied units remained mobile, connected, and supplied. Its performance in Africa directly influenced the planning for future campaigns in Europe and the Pacific. The American military's after-action analysis of the campaign listed the Jeep among the most valuable assets used in desert warfare. Its adaptability across roles, from command transport to combat reconnaissance, gave Allied commanders a tool that could be applied in any tactical situation. The combination of speed, low maintenance, and adaptability made it an essential component of modern mechanized warfare. The Desert War had served as the proving ground for a machine that would soon accompany Allied forces into Europe. The harsh environment, where temperatures soared by day and froze by night, had exposed every weakness and refined every strength of the vehicle. The Jeep emerged from North Africa not just as a transport, but as a battle-tested instrument of modern warfare. The mobility it provided would soon be brought to bear on the European continent, where it would carry the Allied advance from the beaches of Sicily to the roads of Normandy and beyond. The experience in North Africa provided the Allied command with a proven foundation for large-scale mechanized operations, and the Jeep was central to that approach. After the surrender of Axis forces in Tunisia in May 1943, Allied planners turned their attention northward toward southern Europe. The invasion of Sicily, designated Operation Husky, began in July 1943 and marked the first Allied assault on the European continent. The lessons learned in the desert directly influenced the logistical and tactical planning of this campaign, with the Jeep at the core of ground mobility. In preparation for the Sicilian landings, both the U.S. and British forces made specific adaptations to the Jeep for amphibious operations. Vehicles were fitted with waterproofing for engine and electrical components, exhaust extensions to prevent flooding, and brackets for rapid disassembly and reassembly during unloading. Ships and landing craft were specially configured to carry Jeeps as part of the initial assault wave. The vehicle's small size made it ideal for early deployment. It could be driven off landing craft directly onto beaches and into immediate service. During the early stages of the Sicilian campaign, Jeeps were among the first vehicles to move inland after the amphibious landings at Gela, Licata, and Pacino. They transported officers, communications personnel, and reconnaissance teams as Allied forces pushed into the interior. The rugged terrain of Sicily, with its mountains and narrow roads, made heavier vehicles difficult to maneuver. Jeeps proved invaluable in maintaining the speed of advance. They carried messages, supplies, and medical teams over terrain that would have delayed or blocked traditional trucks. American and British units also relied on Jeeps to maintain coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery. Commanders used them to conduct battlefield inspections and communicate between dispersed units. In the rapid movement across Sicily, where Axis forces conducted delaying actions while preparing to evacuate to mainland Italy, the Jeep ensured that momentum was never lost. When the Allied armies turned toward the Italian mainland in September 1943, the vehicle's adaptability once again became evident. The invasion of Italy, beginning with Operation Avalanche at Salerno, introduced new challenges. The terrain was mountainous, the roads were narrow and winding, and weather conditions fluctuated between heat, rain, and mud. Jeeps were modified with better traction tires and chains for the steep roads of southern Italy. They were used to ferry ammunition up to frontline artillery positions and to bring wounded soldiers down from the heights under fire. In the Italian campaign, the Jeep also took on expanded engineering and signal roles. Field engineers used it to carry demolition materials for clearing obstacles and repairing bridges. Communications units mounted radios on Jeeps to create mobile signal posts that allowed divisions to coordinate across the difficult landscape. The Fifth Army under General Mark Clark and the British Eighth Army under General Bernard Montgomery depended heavily on these mobile command vehicles to maintain operational tempo against German defensive positions. The vehicle's significance grew as the Italian campaign evolved into a series of protracted battles, including Monte Cassino and the push toward Rome. Mud, snow, and narrow mountain passes tested every type of vehicle used by the Allies. The Jeep's ability to traverse terrain that immobilized larger trucks made it a constant presence on the front lines. Its reliability allowed it to serve as both a combat support and supply vehicle, performing in conditions that many military planners had initially considered impossible for light vehicles. Meanwhile, preparations were underway for the largest amphibious invasion in history, the assault on Nazi-occupied France. By late 1943 and early 1944, the Jeep had become standardized across Allied forces. Production was fully synchronized between Willys and Ford, ensuring that every unit received vehicles with interchangeable parts and identical performance characteristics. Thousands were staged in Britain in anticipation of Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. The build-up for the invasion required massive logistical coordination. Every infantry and armored division allocated to the operation included Jeeps as part of its vehicle complement. They were used in Britain for training, reconnaissance, and base operations in the months leading up to D-Day. Special waterproofing kits were developed to allow Jeeps to drive through shallow surf during the beach landings. Engineers tested these modifications repeatedly to ensure reliability under combat conditions. On June 6, 1944, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, Jeeps were among the first vehicles to land. They arrived in large numbers aboard landing craft and gliders. The airborne divisions, dropped behind German lines in the early hours of the invasion, also carried disassembled Jeeps inside Waco and Horsa gliders. Once landed, these vehicles were quickly assembled by paratroopers and used to move weapons, ammunition, and wounded men through the hedgerow country. The difficult terrain of Normandy, with its dense bocage, narrow lanes, and soft fields, presented new challenges. Engineers attached cutting devices to the front of some Jeeps to clear vegetation and barbed wire. Reconnaissance units used them to locate German defensive positions hidden among the hedgerows. Medical Corps used Jeeps equipped with stretcher racks to navigate terrain that ambulances could not cross. Their low profile made them less visible targets for enemy fire, allowing for quick retrieval of casualties. In the days following the landings, Jeeps played a crucial role in establishing and maintaining the beachhead. They transported supplies from landing craft to supply dumps, relayed messages, and carried officers between rapidly shifting command posts. The mobility they offered allowed Allied command to coordinate the complex logistics of multiple divisions operating simultaneously under fire. As the breakout from Normandy began, Jeeps became the key to maintaining communication across the expanding front. Once Allied forces broke through the German defenses in Operation Cobra in late July 1944, the Jeep's contribution became even more visible. The rapid advance across France required constant resupply, and the vehicle's speed and maneuverability made it essential for keeping pace with the front lines. Commanders like General George S. Patton used Jeeps to travel with their advancing armored columns, maintaining direct contact with units on the move. Patton's Third Army depended heavily on these vehicles for reconnaissance, courier duties, and coordination between tanks, infantry, and artillery. As the Allies moved toward Paris, the Jeep became a common sight in liberated towns. It transported liaison officers between American, British, and Free French forces, and it carried interpreters, medics, and press correspondents documenting the campaign. The French resistance, newly armed and organized, used captured Jeeps to support local uprisings and sabotage operations as Allied troops approached. The adaptability of the Jeep continued to shape operational success during the pursuit of retreating German forces. Bridges destroyed by the enemy slowed heavy armor, but Jeeps could ford shallow rivers and bypass damaged routes. They were used to scout ahead and find alternate crossings, ensuring that the advance did not lose momentum. When engineers constructed temporary Bailey bridges, Jeeps were the first vehicles to test them, verifying their stability before heavier equipment crossed. In addition to frontline service, Jeeps performed administrative and coordination roles throughout the European theater. They moved supplies within depots, carried mail and dispatches, and served as inspection vehicles for logistics officers overseeing the massive supply chain that supported the invasion. Their mechanical simplicity and high reliability meant that breakdowns were rare and quickly repaired, spare parts were abundant, and maintenance crews had become highly skilled in field repairs, often keeping vehicles running under continuous use. As Allied armies advanced eastward through France and into Belgium, Jeeps remained integral to coordination between ground forces and air support. Forward air controllers used them to move rapidly between observation posts, directing airstrikes against German armor and troop concentrations. Radio-equipped Jeeps enabled real-time communication between ground commanders and tactical air units. This coordination proved decisive in operations such as the closing of the Falaise Pocket in August 1944, where Allied forces encircled and destroyed large German formations. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, the Jeep demonstrated its reliability under extreme winter conditions. Snow and ice covered the Ardennes region, and many larger vehicles struggled to move through the narrow, frozen roads. Jeeps fitted with snow chains and cold weather kits maintained mobility, delivering supplies and evacuating wounded soldiers during the harshest fighting. They also served as command vehicles for small counterattack units operating in rapidly changing battle conditions. The vehicle's performance in Europe cemented its reputation as a key component of Allied strategy. From Sicily's rocky hills to Normandy's hedgerows and Belgium's frozen forests, it had adapted to every environment. The combination of speed, durability, and ease of repair made it indispensable to every branch of the service: infantry, armor, artillery, engineers, and medical corps. Corps alike. By early 1945, as Allied forces approached the Rhine, Jeeps were deployed in unprecedented numbers. They were used for river crossing preparations, carrying bridge engineers and demolition experts. Reconnaissance units drove them across captured bridges under enemy fire to secure footholds on the eastern bank. In the rapid push into Germany that followed, the Jeep continued to serve as the backbone of tactical mobility, linking front-line units to the vast logistical network that supplied them. The European campaigns proved the full strategic value of the Jeep. What had begun as a small reconnaissance car evolved into one of the most essential military vehicles of the war. Its consistent presence from the beaches of Sicily to the roads of Normandy symbolized the Allied ability to adapt and sustain mobility across every front. As the armies moved deeper into occupied Europe, the same vehicle that had crossed deserts now carried the Allied advance toward the heart of Germany itself. As the Allied armies pushed deeper into Europe in 1944 and 1945, operations increasingly relied on speed, information, and coordination. Mobility alone no longer guaranteed success. Victory depended on knowing enemy positions, movements, and strength ahead of time. Reconnaissance, sabotage, and coordination with underground resistance networks became vital to the overall strategy. The Jeep, small, fast, and easy to conceal, became the preferred vehicle for intelligence-gathering missions and for supporting partisans operating behind German lines. Reconnaissance units of the U.S. Army, British Army, and Free French forces were organized into small, highly mobile detachments that could move ahead of the main columns to locate enemy strongpoints and observe movement. These units depended on vehicles that could traverse rough ground quietly and escape quickly if discovered. The Jeep's combination of four-wheel drive, low silhouette, and mechanical simplicity made it ideal for this role. Specialized reconnaissance groups, such as the U.S. Army's 82nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron and the British Reconnaissance Corps, routinely used Jeeps equipped with additional radios, map boards, and light weapons. Many were modified with camouflage paint, reduced lighting, and mounts for machine guns such as the .30 or .50 caliber Browning. Their tasks included probing enemy lines, identifying routes for armor and infantry, and reporting back to headquarters. Because of its small size, the Jeep could be hidden under tree cover or in ruined buildings during daytime observation, reducing the risk of detection. One of the most significant uses of the Jeep in reconnaissance occurred during the Allied advance through France and into Belgium. As armored divisions moved forward rapidly, reconnaissance units had to keep pace and maintain contact with retreating German forces. Jeeps allowed them to do so effectively. Scouts used the vehicles to cross temporary bridges, check for ambushes, and locate roadblocks. In many cases, they reached towns hours before the main forces, assessing whether German troops were still present or had withdrawn. British and American reconnaissance patrols often coordinated with local resistance networks who provided intelligence about enemy movements. The Jeep's ability to move quietly on rural roads and through forest paths allowed Allied officers to meet with partisan leaders without drawing attention. These meetings provided valuable information for planning airstrikes, sabotage missions, and routes of advance. The Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the wartime intelligence agency of the United States, relied heavily on Jeeps for field missions in occupied territory. OSS agents, operating alongside the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, used Jeeps for infiltration and extraction operations once Allied lines moved closer to occupied zones. When advancing Allied units reached areas previously held by the Germans, Jeeps carried OSS officers and radio operators who made direct contact with local resistance groups. They distributed supplies, weapons, and coded communication devices, establishing coordinated efforts between guerrilla forces and regular armies. In France, after the D-Day landings, Jeeps became critical to the rapid expansion of underground resistance into open warfare. Resistance groups such as the French Forces of the Interior, FFI, used captured or supplied jeeps to conduct ambushes, cut supply lines, and intercept retreating German convoys. Because the vehicles could navigate forest roads and narrow village streets, they allowed small groups to strike quickly and withdraw before enemy reinforcements arrived. The mobility offered by these vehicles gave partisans an unprecedented tactical advantage compared to the bicycles, carts, and horses they had relied on earlier in the war. The British Chatti SOE also supplied jeeps to resistance movements in Yugoslavia, Greece, and Italy. In the Balkans, the terrain of mountains and valleys made movement difficult for both Axis and Allied forces. The jeep, capable of climbing steep paths and fording rivers, enabled liaison officers to reach partisan camps that were otherwise inaccessible. The vehicles carried ammunition, medical supplies, and portable radios used to coordinate supply drops from Allied aircraft. In Yugoslavia, forces under Josip Broz Tito received jeeps through Allied airdrops and naval deliveries from Italy. These vehicles were used not only for mobility, but as a means of establishing regular communication with Allied headquarters in Bari and Cairo. Reconnaissance jeeps were also used for deception and counterintelligence operations. During the final stages of the Normandy campaign, several Allied deception units, including the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, known as the Ghost Army, used jeeps fitted with false unit markings and loudspeaker systems to simulate the movement of large formations. By moving these vehicles strategically and broadcasting recorded sounds of tanks and troop movements, they diverted German forces from real attack routes. The small size of the jeep made it perfect for these mobile deception missions, which required constant relocation to maintain the illusion of large-scale operations. In Italy, the rugged Apennine Mountains made traditional reconnaissance difficult. Jeep-mounted patrols of the U.S. 10th Mountain Division and British 8th Army explored mountain passes and valleys to locate German defensive lines. Scouts used the vehicles to transport observers and spotters equipped with binoculars and rangefinders. Once positions were identified, artillery units could target German strongpoints with greater accuracy. The use of jeeps in this capacity shortened the time between discovery and engagement, allowing for faster and more coordinated offensives. The adaptability of the jeep also extended to night operations. Many reconnaissance units fitted the vehicles with blackout headlights and mufflers to reduce noise. Night patrols were particularly valuable during the winter of 1944 to 1945, when visibility was limited and both sides relied heavily on stealth. Jeeps allowed Allied units to operate after dark, setting up ambushes and locating German patrols attempting to infiltrate lines. The vehicle's agility in darkness gave scouts confidence that they could maneuver out of danger quickly if discovered. In addition to formal reconnaissance, jeeps were widely used in coordination with air observation units. Air-ground cooperation became a critical component of Allied tactics, especially during the rapid advances in late 1944. Jeeps fitted with radio equipment served as forward air control vehicles. Observers would locate enemy concentrations from elevated terrain, then call in airstrikes directly to nearby pilots. This allowed for precise coordination that significantly weakened German defensive positions and supply routes. The jeep also served as a key tool for coordinating efforts between Allied armies and local civilians. In liberated territories, military government officers and civil affairs personnel used jeeps to reach isolated towns quickly, assess conditions, and distribute aid. These missions often required travel through areas not yet fully cleared of enemy resistance, making the vehicle's speed and dependability essential. The same mobility that had served in reconnaissance now enabled rapid stabilization of newly liberated regions. As Allied forces moved deeper into the continent, the jeep continued to support resistance movements even in areas still under German occupation. In the Netherlands, during Operation Market Garden in September 1944, Jeeps were dropped by glider along with airborne troops. Some were used by Dutch resistance fighters to guide Allied units through unfamiliar terrain, using local knowledge to avoid ambushes and minefields. In several cases, Jeeps carried hidden compartments for smuggling intelligence documents and radio parts across front lines. In Eastern Europe, under Soviet coordination, the Jeep became a link between Western and Soviet-supported partisan groups. American Lend-Lease shipments had already provided thousands of Jeeps to the Red Army, which in turn passed some on to local guerrillas in Poland and the Balkans. These vehicles were employed for reconnaissance, courier duties, and evacuation of wounded fighters from forest camps. Despite differences in command and ideology between Western and Soviet-aligned resistance movements, the Jeep functioned as a shared practical asset that enhanced all underground operations. As Allied armies advanced into Germany in early 1945, reconnaissance missions intensified. German defenses were collapsing, but isolated pockets of resistance, snipers, and ambushes remained. Jeep-mounted reconnaissance patrols entered towns ahead of main forces to determine whether resistance persisted or surrender terms could be accepted. Military police and counterintelligence units used Jeeps to secure roads, locate hidden German positions, and apprehend fleeing officers of the Wehrmacht and SS. The vehicle's ability to cover long distances on damaged roads allowed these patrols to stabilize newly captured areas rapidly. In many occupied regions, the Jeep also became a visible emblem of Allied presence to local populations. Resistance fighters who had spent years operating on foot now traveled with Allied officers in Jeeps as they transitioned from guerrilla operations to formal liberation forces. In France, Norway, and Denmark, the sight of these vehicles often marked the first tangible evidence of liberation. They carried liaison teams coordinating between partisan units and advancing armies, helping to prevent confusion and friendly fire incidents. Reconnaissance reports from the final months of the war emphasized that the Jeep allowed for near-continuous observation of enemy positions. With radio contact established directly from the field, commanders could receive updates within minutes rather than hours. This accelerated tempo of intelligence collection gave the Allies an advantage in responding to German counterattacks and reorganizing their own forces in real time. Captured German officers later acknowledged the effectiveness of Allied reconnaissance and mobility. Interrogations conducted in 1945 by U.S. intelligence units revealed that German field commanders were often unaware of how quickly Allied scouts could locate and flank their positions. They noted that the small American vehicles, often seen darting across open ground, made it nearly impossible to predict Allied movements accurately. The Jeep's contribution to clandestine warfare, intelligence gathering, and resistance coordination represented one of the less visible but most strategically significant aspects of the Allied campaign. Its ability to bridge the gap between regular and irregular warfare, and between front lines and occupied territories, gave the Allies continuous situational awareness. By the time Allied forces crossed into the heart of Germany, the Jeep had become not only a transport vehicle, but a mobile platform for intelligence, communication, and coordination across every level of the European theater. This combination of speed, adaptability, and operational reach allowed it to serve as the unseen backbone of countless missions behind enemy lines, ensuring that every advance across Europe was guided by accurate information and local cooperation. As the war neared its end, the same vehicle that had started as a reconnaissance car now operated as the primary link between conventional armies and the networks that had fought occupation from within. By early 1945, the Allied advance into Germany had become a relentless push from every direction. American, British, and Canadian forces pressed in from the west, while the Soviet Red Army surged from the east. The final months of the war demanded speed, coordination, and endurance. The Jeep, already indispensable in reconnaissance and resistance coordinations, now became the universal tool of the Allied war machine during the collapse of the Third Reich. In the West, after the breakout from Normandy and the liberation of France, the Allied armies had to maintain their momentum through Belgium, the Netherlands, and across the Rhine. Roads were destroyed, bridges blown apart, and the winter conditions of late 1944 and early 1945 made movement extremely difficult. Jeeps provided the flexibility to navigate the wreckage of Europe where heavier trucks and tanks could not. They carried officers, dispatch riders, and supplies over terrain that had been churned into mud by artillery and retreating armor. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, the Jeep proved vital in countering the surprise German offensive. The dense forests of the Ardennes and the snow-covered tracks limited movement. Yet Jeeps continued to operate where most vehicles failed. They transported ammunition and rations to isolated units, evacuated wounded soldiers, and served as mobile communication centers for forward commanders. At Bastogne, surrounded by German forces, Jeeps moved through enemy fire to maintain supply lines and deliver critical messages between the scattered American positions of the 101st Airborne Division. When the Allies regained the initiative in January 1945, Jeeps were once again at the forefront of the counteroffensive. As armored divisions broke through German lines, Jeep convoys followed close behind, carrying engineers, medics, and liaison officers who helped re-establish roads and communications. Their constant mobility allowed the Allies to regain control of territory faster than German forces could reorganize. Crossing the Rhine River in March 1945 marked the turning point in the Western Campaign. Operation Plunder, led by British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, involved complex coordination between air, ground, and engineering units. Jeeps were used extensively to transport assault engineers, signal operators, and commanders across newly built pontoon bridges once bridgeheads were secured. On the American sector, units under General Omar Bradley and General George S. Patton used the vehicles to maintain constant reconnaissance and relay reports as armored columns crossed into the heart of Germany. In the rapid advance that followed, Jeeps carried forward observers who directed artillery fire on retreating German formations. They also transported prisoners of war back to collection points and delivered supplies to frontline infantry that moved faster than traditional supply lines could support. The ability of the Jeep to operate independently of large convoys ensured that advancing units were never entirely cut off. Within Germany itself, the destruction of infrastructure was near total. Towns and cities were heavily bombed, and rail networks had collapsed. Military movement depended on smaller, more versatile vehicles. Jeeps became the default means of transport for officers and liaison staff moving between corps and division headquarters. They were often the first Allied vehicles to enter captured German towns, carrying civil affairs personnel tasked with restoring order and coordinating with local officials. During the final operations against the Ruhr Pocket in April 1945, where hundreds of thousands of German troops were encircled, Jeeps played a central logistical role. The terrain of Western Germany, dense forests, river valleys, and destroyed bridges, made heavier supply vehicles ineffective. Jeeps carried reconnaissance teams that mapped enemy escape routes, allowing Allied commanders to seal off the encirclement completely. They also moved rapidly between American and British units to coordinate joint efforts, demonstrating once again how critical mobility was to the coordination of multinational forces. At the same time in southern Germany, Patton's Third Army advanced toward Bavaria and Austria. Jeep columns transported intelligence officers who followed behind the front lines to collect documents, interrogate prisoners, and assess captured installations. The speed with which these teams operated allowed the Allies to gather valuable information about remaining German command structures and secret weapons projects before they could be destroyed. The Jeep also became an essential part of the humanitarian response during the liberation of concentration camps. As Allied forces entered camps such as Buchenwald, Dachau, and Mauthausen in the spring of 1945, Jeeps carried medical officers, supplies, and war correspondents who documented the conditions of survivors. They transported doctors and relief personnel across the devastated landscape, often along routes impassable to larger vehicles. In these operations, the same machine that had been built for battle became a tool of rescue and documentation. In urban combat during the final push into major German cities, Jeeps were adapted for patrol and support roles. In Cologne, Frankfurt, and Nuremberg, they moved through rubble-strewn streets carrying small infantry teams or communication units. Some were fitted with light armor plates or mounted machine guns for self-defense. The vehicle's small turning radius and agility allowed it to maneuver through ruins, where tanks and trucks were too large to operate effectively. As Allied armies linked up with Soviet forces on the Elbe River in April 1945, Jeeps facilitated the coordination between the two fronts. American liaison officers used them to cross to Soviet positions, carrying interpreters and documents that formalized the boundary between advancing armies. These meetings symbolized the final encirclement of Nazi Germany, and Jeeps were present at nearly every one of them, carrying messages between generals who commanded millions of men. When Berlin finally fell to Soviet forces on May 2, 1945, Jeeps were already operating in the surrounding zones under Allied control. American and British units used them to patrol occupied areas, locate hidden pockets of resistance, and secure key industrial facilities. They also became essential to the logistics of occupation. In the months following Germany's surrender, thousands of Jeeps remained in use for administrative purposes, helping Allied military governments maintain order and rebuild transport networks. The vehicle's significance extended beyond Germany. In Italy, Jeeps continued to serve in the mopping-up operations against remaining Axis forces in the north. In Austria and Czechoslovakia, they carried liaison teams that negotiated the surrender of isolated German units. In Norway and Denmark, where liberation occurred in May 1945, Jeeps from British forces became the first Allied vehicles to appear in city streets, marking the restoration of freedom after years of occupation. Captured German soldiers often expressed disbelief at the efficiency of the American transport system, noting that the Allies seemed to possess endless numbers of small, fast vehicles that appeared wherever they were needed. Interrogation reports collected by Allied intelligence confirmed that many German commanders had underestimated the impact of the Jeep. Early in the war, Hitler himself had dismissed it as a toy, believing that such a light vehicle could not endure the demands of combat. By 1945, the same vehicle had become a fundamental reason the Allies could maintain their operational tempo across multiple fronts. From a production standpoint, the Jeep symbolized industrial coordination on an unprecedented scale. Over 600,000 units were produced between 1941 and 1945 by Willys Overland and Ford, with interchangeable parts allowing repairs to be carried out anywhere in the world. The vehicle's reliability meant that it required minimal maintenance even after months of field use. This uniformity of design and ease of repair made it the backbone of Allied mobility not only in Europe, but also in the Pacific and other theaters of war. The logistical value of the Jeep was further demonstrated in the closing operations of the war in Europe, where it linked the front lines directly to supply depots and headquarters. Jeeps were used to carry critical communications when radio signals were jammed or unavailable, ensuring constant contact between units. They also delivered fuel, ammunition, and spare parts for tanks and artillery at speeds no other vehicle could match over difficult ground. In addition to its military utility, the Jeep had a psychological impact on the Allied troops. Its presence represented adaptability, speed, and the resourcefulness that characterized the Allied way of warfare. Soldiers trusted it implicitly. They had seen it survive shell fire, traverse rivers, and climb terrain that no other wheeled vehicle could. Its durability reinforced morale in the final months of the war, when fatigue and uncertainty were constant companions. As the war ended and occupation began, the Jeep became an enduring symbol of Allied victory and the technological ingenuity that had supported it. Photographs from the ruins of Berlin, the bridges of the Rhine, and the roads of Bavaria all show the same small, open vehicle beside tanks and troops. It had carried generals and privates alike, crossed deserts, forests, and cities, and played a part in nearly every major campaign, from North Africa to Central Europe. In the months following Germany's surrender, surplus Jeeps were distributed to Allied partners and reconstruction teams. They were used by engineers rebuilding roads, by relief agencies delivering food, and by journalists documenting the aftermath of the conflict. The same machine that had carried soldiers into battle now moved supplies and aid through a devastated continent. For the United States, the Jeep's success became a symbol of how American industry and ingenuity had contributed to victory. It demonstrated that mobility and reliability could be just as decisive as firepower. In Germany, captured Wehrmacht officers recognized the Jeep as one of the key elements that allowed the Allies to sustain their advances despite logistical challenges. What had once been dismissed as a minor reconnaissance car had, by war's end, become an integral part of the machinery that dismantled Hitler's empire. When the Allied victory celebrations began in May 1945, Jeeps were present in every parade, carrying flags, officers, and liberated civilians. They had traveled from the deserts of Africa to the heart of Berlin, and their role in that journey was inseparable from the course of the war itself. The Jeep had started as an experiment in mobility, but ended as one of the most significant tools of modern warfare. A vehicle that embodied the industrial and tactical strengths that ultimately broke the power of Nazi Germany. By the time the guns fell silent, the Jeep had become more than just a vehicle. It was a symbol of how the Allies fought and won, through coordination, mobility, and relentless adaptability. From the ruins of Berlin to the rebuilding of Europe, the small machine that Hitler once mocked as a toy had helped roll over his empire and bring the war in Europe to its decisive end.